Welcome to the Nutritional Mental Health Podcast, the podcast where we talk about the intersection of nutrition and psychological sciences. I'm your host, Annika Angelo, a nutritional mental health practitioner with a master's in health psychology. I'm passionate about making science accessible and stories listened to. To dive deeper into nutritional psychology, you can find me on Instagram at NutriMindCoach. And now, let's get into this episode. Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, PhD, is the founder of Nutrivore.com and the New York Times bestselling author of Nutrivore, the radical new science for getting the nutrients you need from the food you eat. She creates educational resources to help people improve their day-to-day diet and lifestyle choices, empowered and informed by the most current evidence-based scientific research. With Nutrivore, Dr. Sarah has created a positive and inclusive approach to dietary guidance based in science and devoid of dogma, using nutrient density and sufficiency as its basic principles. Nourishment, not judgment. For those of you who've been following my content, you'll recognize that this philosophy is evidence-based nutrition, focused nutrition, and that is the one that I share as well. So I'm so excited to be able to speak not only about this perspective that all food fits, but also discuss some of the myths that have been perpetuated on social media. So that all being said, thanks so much, Dr. Sarah, for being on here. I'm very excited to talk to you about all these questions I have.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so before we get into any of that nutrition myth busting, I want to talk even more about what is the Nutrivore approach to food, because if someone's listening and they're hearing Nutrivore, what the heck is that? What is it? How does it work practically?
So Nutrivore is this incredibly clever play on words, right? So like just genius level play on words.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Carnivore eats meat, herbivore eats plants, and a nutrivore eats nutrients. But really, it's a dietary philosophy that lives somewhere between a diet, the way we typically think of diets, and an anti-diet, where the goal is just to get all of the nutrients our bodies need from the foods we eat. And when you think of nutrition, it's this like really basic principle of supplying our bodies with all of the nutritive resources, like all of the raw materials that our cells need for all of their chemical reactions. When you think of nutrition that simply, but also that like ironclad logically, you are sort of free from thinking about diet in terms of restriction, because you start going, okay, like let me just do the math. I'm just going to calculate how many different ways that there are to hit the daily value of all 49 essential nutrients. How many different ways can I choose foods to do that? Millions, millions, and millions. And you can do that in many different dietary frameworks. So Nutrivore is about understanding what nutrients do in the body, respecting the value of vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and health promoting fatty acids, and about understanding like what types of foods on average have what types of nutrients and like the relative balance, right? So how much of these foods do I need to eat in order to get the nutrients that I need from them? And that knowledge allows us to like achieve this really important goal of getting all of the nutrients we need within our access, like within our budget, within our preferences, and if we have a diet that we, resonate with within our dietary preferences, like within our dietary template that we align with. So that's why I say like Nutrivore is kind of weirdly in between diet and anti-diet. I would say the default mode is anti-diet, right? So it is getting all of the nutrients we need while continuing to eat whatever we want, right? It's sort of that is the idea. How to, I refer to it as sustainable nutrition. So it is healthy eating patterns that are maintainable for our entire lives. And in order for that to be the case, we have to get joy from our diet. Like joy is also an essential nutrient. So if we can get joy from our diet and we love the foods we're eating, then we can stick to it. So respecting the choice of foods for quality of life is kind of like, that's to me, that's the default state of Nutrivore. But if you're a vegetarian for ethical reasons, or you don't eat certain foods for religious reasons, or you have allergies or other medical reasons to avoid certain foods, you can still use this base knowledge to make small changes, small additions, easy swaps within those dietary frameworks to also achieve that goal of getting all of the nutrients our bodies need. So Nutrivore is more an approach than a diet itself, or more a broad nutritional sciences education, that if only we got this in school, right? If only we graduated high school with the same amount of nutrition knowledge as we have like grammar or algebra knowledge, that would completely change the landscape of public health, because we would all know, and we'd all intuitively understand, not just know, but intuitively understand what a nutrient focused healthy diet looks like, and how much we're going to call them empty calories for lack of a better term, can still fit into a healthy diet. And we would be able to identify fear-based predatory marketing when we run into it online, and we would be at least more or less receptive to it, right? If we just had that base
Mm,
knowledge to be able to say, well, that's not right, and then I don't need to listen to you anymore, right? So
right.
Nutrivore is like also about just like creating a more informed user base of nutrition.
Yeah. And I love that because I mean, as a person who used to count calories, used to count macros, again, it is like a number focused thing, and I love numbers. However, counting like the other types of numbers just never worked for me mentally.
Yeah.
But like being able to like see, oh, strawberries, they have technically a more nutrient dense profile than blueberries. So interesting. Um, that doesn't mean don't eat your blueberries. I mean, still
Correct.
eat those. But if you want to make sure that you're getting, say, like more specific types of nutrients, choose strawberries over it. And yeah, I think it's just a very freeing model because it
Yeah.
isn't like
So
focused on one specific type of dietary eating pattern.
so to elaborate a little bit on the Nutrivore score calculation, because one of the things you mentioned was being somebody who's like freed by this number. And I think that is my preference of how to use this nutrient density calculation. So nutrient density is scientifically defined as nutrients per calorie. And the Nutrivore score is a very robust way to measure that. 33 nutrients go into the calculation, but it can't tell us everything we need to know about a food to inform our choices. Like as much as like I've created this number that I think is fascinating, and I love the redemption arcs of like iceberg lettuce being more nutrient dense than celery
Oh,
or cucumbers or
that
artichoke. I mean, I just like, to me, that's so exciting to just see these foods that have these like unearned reputations for being crunchy water, right? Or blueberries. Blueberries are great, but like the fact that strawberries have nearly double the nutrient density, like I think to me, that's so exciting, and I just like nerd out over it. But I do want to honor, because Nutrivore is also a path for diet recovery, and really kind of getting off that like on again, off again diet roller coaster of doom that I spent most of my life on. And I know that like many of us do. I want to like acknowledge that the Nutrivore score is just one tool that I've created for implementing this dietary philosophy, and it is not a necessary tool. So if that number is triggering, because some people get really wrapped up in the number, so they'll go, okay, well, this food has a Nutrivore score of 500, and this food has a Nutrivore score of 504. So I have to pick the one that's
mm,
504. When in practice, that difference is meaningless. That difference is not that's if you think of it in terms of like the percent difference between those two foods, it's a fraction of 1%, right? But some people get like over fixated on doing those tiny swaps to try to like gamify. And so I want to acknowledge that not every tool works for every person, and that goes for every tool that I've created for implementing Nutrivore. There's sort of like the basic principles of just eat a diversity of foods, eat more whole foods, eat lots of fruits and vegetables. And then there's like, you can like go a little bit level up of that. I have a like meal planning tool called the Nutrivore Meal Map, which is basically like how to divide your plate between different portions of foods. And then you can go a level up and focus on Nutrivore foundational foods and the Nutrivore weekly serving matrix. And then you can go a level up from that and start going like, what are my swaps from the Nutrivore score? Not like we can mix and match to figure out what works for us with the goal of sustainability, right? Like if we are so in the weeds that we're focusing on, well, this food gets more nutrient dense when it's cooked and this food gets less nutrient dense when it's cooked, and this food's more nutrient dense if it's canned. And so like if we're starting to like gamify those incredibly small, not meaningful differences in the nutrient density, we're kind of missing the forest for the trees. And so for those people, I want to let's just take a step back and work on the patterns, right? Let's just take a step back and work on the overall types of foods that we're choosing and mixing it up day to day or week to week. Week to week's a little bit easier from a grocery shopping perspective than day to day.
It's
And
also, I
so,
feel like, easier to, or it's almost a better perspective because, of course, we're not going to get all the essential nutrients every single day. Like, that's
yeah,
not how life works at
but
all.
we don't need to. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
we have different abilities to store different nutrients, right? So some nutrients like water soluble vitamins, we can't store a ton. We burn through them pretty quickly. We probably want to be averaging the daily value of water soluble vitamins over a 2 to 3 day period. So we want to make sure that if we're low on a Monday, that we're high on a Tuesday or Wednesday. These happen to be some of the easiest nutrients to get, right? Some of the easiest ones are the ones that are really easy for us to just like flush out any extra, and we don't need to store it because it's so easy to get. And then fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, we can store enough for a couple of months, right? So if you're deficient, if you suddenly stop, eating one of these vitamins, it's several months before you start to see signs of deficiency. So those are ones that, really we don't need to like we just want to average the daily value over that time scale. That doesn't mean like ideally it wouldn't be a month of low and then a month of high, but
Right. Yeah.
just to like more as an illustration of how unimportant it is to hit the daily value every single day, that it's okay if you're low on a nutrient, on occasion. It's just that if you're consistently low, if you use one of those apps that like tracks all your vitamins and minerals and you see you never get enough calcium, well, that's great information. Now let's troubleshoot that. Let's find some calcium-rich foods that fit my budget and preferences and, the amount of time that I have to prepare food, and see, how I can integrate that into my diet. Or maybe if there aren't any foods that fit, right? If I can't find a food that makes sense for everything that I have going on, maybe that identifies the need for a supplementation strategy. So
Mhm.
like I'm also not anti-supplement. I certainly believe in food first. I think the science is pretty unequivocal that when we get nutrients from foods, it's beneficial. When we get nutrients from supplements, it's a mixed bag and it's not uniformly beneficial. Sometimes it just doesn't improve our health the way you would think it should.
Yeah.
And
That
so
was one of the most wild things I learned when I was going through my master's because I was like, oh, supplementation, of course, it's fine. Like, you do it because you probably don't get enough. And then like when you look at the research, it's, oh, so
underwhelming.
yeah, it consistently, the more you eat your supplements that you want to eat, then it actually works. But if you just like supplement using a pill, it doesn't always.
Yeah, certainly not for the big things, right? So we've got these huge studies now and like meta-analyses that pool together data from all these different studies that look at the health impact of taking a daily multivitamin, right? So we're sold a daily multivitamin as nutritional insurance, right? Like just covering your bases. And we see people who take a daily multivitamin, we see no difference in the biggies, right? The big health outcomes. So cancer incidence or mortality, cardiovascular disease incidence or mortality, or all-cause mortality, which is a really like vague, but like general measurement of whether or not something is good or bad for us overall. And we don't see a signal. So it's not causing any harm, right? So, for somebody who maybe doesn't have access to um, a lot of whole foods, there doesn't seem to be harm from a multivitamin, but there also doesn't seem to be benefit. So if that money that's going to a multivitamin could otherwise go to some food sources of those nutrients, that would be a better trade budget-wise.
Mm.
And I think that that's, for me, that just reinforces my message of Nutrivore, of like identifying the food sources of these nutrients and figuring out, how to fit those into my daily diet or weekly diet, as the case may be. Um, but I also think, there's something really interesting, because I also think that science doesn't have a really good answer for why. Like, why don't multivitamins improve health? Like, we know that if we get more of those nutrients from food, it does. We know that people who just naturally eat a more nutrient replete diet have better health outcomes. So why don't multivitamins, if on paper they look like they're filling the gaps, why don't they have
Mm.
the same health benefits? The answer may be that we're not absorbing many of those nutrients and they're just going straight through us. The answer might be taking those supplements with a meal versus on an empty stomach. So we're going to absorb the nutrients better if we take it with a meal. So maybe it's kind of dependent on that, but we don't actually know for sure. Maybe it's that it's not enough, or maybe that it's that there's so many important nutrients that aren't formulated into the supplements. But like, all of those are hypotheses. We don't actually have a definitive answer for why a multivitamin doesn't reduce cardiovascular disease risk when we know that the nutrients in that multivitamin do when we get those from food. So to me, that's just like a fascinating question that still needs to be answered from science. In the meantime, what we do know is the importance of a nutrients first approach to food, but one that is balanced in such a way that it is sustainable.
And speaking of that, I would love for you to talk more about your 12 foundational families, because when I read that, I mean, again, like this was already part of my philosophy. I just like never wrote it down. And then when I read it, I was like, whoa, this is what I do. And so it was like, oh, I love that someone has this on paper. Um, but it is such an easy, well, not easy. Once you like work on it, it
It's
can be
a
easier, but
formula for people who like a formula. Do you know what I mean?
yes.
Like, um, so in like the resources that I create, so social media, my newsletter, my articles on my website, my book Nutrivore, I try to give like levels. I don't call them levels. Like, I don't like level 1, do this, progress to level 2. Like, that's not, we're not trying to like create some kind of like stepping stone pyramid thing here, but rather, I want to meet you where you are. So I want to make that first step to improving diet feel as easy as possible. Like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's not going to taste gross. That's not going to take too much time. That's not going to strain my budget. I can absolutely add, right, that side salad to my drive-through order. Oh, sure, I can pick a piece of fruit instead of a vending machine snack. I can definitely refill my soda with, instead of more soda, I can have water or unsweet tea, right? Like, it's like I want to meet people where they are.
Mm.
The Nutrivore Weekly Serving Matrix and the 12 Foundational Foods is for the person who's already kind of mastered eating more whole foods, cooking at home more often, diversifying their diet, making sure that meals include a protein food and a starchy food and some vegetables, right? So like, it's for that person who's kind of already mastered those things and is wanting to like fine tune, or the person who needs the formula in order to make the change in the first place, right? Or for the person who's like, yeah, but tell me exactly what to eat. I need to know, I need a list of foods. And that's also what the Nutrivore Foundational Foods does. So like, two different people, same plan. So the 12 foundational foods are, we'll just list them first of all. So it's vegetables in general, and then there's a few vegetable families that earn foundational food status. So cruciferous vegetables, that's the cabbage family. So that includes broccoli, kale, collard greens, radishes, rutabaga, arugula, cauliflower, many, many, many. Half of the vegetables in the grocery store are cruciferous vegetables. Leafy vegetables, root vegetables, mushrooms, and alliums. That's the onion family. So that would include onions, garlic, shallots, chives, spring onions. Then there's fruit in general, and then 2 fruit families that also get foundational food status. So berries and citrus fruit. Then there's nuts, seeds, and peanuts. Pulse type legumes. So that includes beans, chickpeas, lentils, and seafood. So fish and shellfish. And I want to say, like, a big caveat is you don't have to eat all of these foods to meet your nutritional needs. These are the foods that when you focus on them, and I have serving targets per week for all of them, that when you do that, it expedites the process of meeting your nutritional needs. So it creates the most room for rounding out with whatever makes sense for you, whether that's something that stretches your budget or something that's just tasty, or, a cultural food, a traditional food, comfort food, right? Like something that your mom used to make when you were little, right? So it creates the most room calorically for all of those other foods that are important for the quality of life aspect of following a healthy diet. So to go through the serving targets, because I don't hold any information hostage. Ideally, we'd aim for 5 servings of vegetables per day, but it's okay to work up to that. That can seem like a lot. And the science is mixed on it. I think that the preponderance of evidence supports 5, but if I really wanted to, I could also make a case for 3. So, like, knowing that if 5 is just like, holy smokes, there's no way I can eat 5 servings of vegetables per day. First of all, a serving's not as big as you think. A serving is 1 cup measured raw, which is about the same volume as your fist. And most vegetables shrink to about half a cup when cooked. So you're probably already putting 2 servings of vegetables on your plate, and you're counting it as 1, but it's actually 2. So you're probably doing better than you think. And yeah, if 5 just seems like a non-starter, start with 3. Start with 1. Like, start with where you are. Where we're going to take the first step. We're going to take whatever that first great change is. That is the best one to make. With fruit, we're going to aim for 2 or 3 servings per day. Same whole conversation as we had with vegetables, we can have with fruit. With the vegetable subfamilies, ideally it'd be about 1 serving of leafy vegetables per day, 1 serving of root vegetables per day, 1 serving of cruciferous vegetables per day. Some vegetables count in both categories, right? So radishes are both a root vegetable and a cruciferous vegetable. So are turnips, so are rutabaga. Kale and collard greens and mustard greens and arugula are both a leafy vegetable and a cruciferous vegetable. So always, like, you can double count things. You could triple count things. I can't think of anything that would triple count, but that's okay. You count things everywhere that you can count. And then onions and mushrooms, we want 3 or more servings per week. For fruit, for the fruit subfamily, so berries, 2 servings per week is great. For citrus, 3 servings per week is great. And of course, you can have more than that, but this is sort of like a great target for getting enough of the nutrients these foods contain to have the, like, majority of the health benefits that those nutrients offer us. It's sort of like where those come from. So it comes from trying to, like, max out or almost max out the benefits that we can get from these fruits and vegetable families. With nuts, seeds, and peanuts, 4 1-ounce servings per week is great, up to a serving per day or more, but, like, that is sort of the range where we see benefit, is like 4 to 7 servings per week. With legumes, also 4 or more, like up to every meal if you want to. But 4 is like huge benefits to cardiovascular disease risk and all-cause mortality. And then with seafood, about 3 servings per week is sort of sufficient to meet our nutritional needs from the nutrients that are like specific to seafood. So in this case, we're really talking about the beneficial omega-3s that seafood has. But seafood's also the most nutrient-dense protein foods on average.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of other great reasons to choose seafood. So when we can do this, and, like, that sounded like a lot, that's why I have the Nutrivore Weekly Serving Matrix. It's just a checklist for keeping track of all that and keeping track of your progress if you're going to take it 1 step at a time. It's also a great tool for keeping track, and that is something that is available as a digital resource on my site, or it's in my book. So however you want it, that's how you can get it. Or you can also just, make your own version of a checklist if you want to. Like, you don't have to use mine. If you want to, just use a scratch pad and write all that down, that's cool too. But yeah, that is the fastest way to get all of those nutrients and those like foods that have really big long-term health benefits. That is sort of like the most efficient way to get there.
I just absolutely love that because I mean, like I said, when I was reading your book, it's like, this is everything I teach my mental health clients. Like basically to the letter, like I tell them, make sure that you are eating a berry and a citrus every day. And then when I read that, I was like, oh, I'm not the only one who saw that science.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're obviously reading the same
Yes.
studies. Yeah.
And the whole like cruciferous as well
And
as fruit. Yeah.
even though I take more of a general health approach when devising all of those numbers, you come up with basically, right, like 2 servings of berries the per week. I mean, that reduces risk of all-cause mortality by about 10%, which is equivalent to about an extra year of life, which
Mhm.
is huge deal. I mean, I care. But also like the huge reduction in the risk of Parkinson's disease, right? So like also you can start looking at like health outcomes that are maybe more personal because it runs in your family, or you've had a doctor tell you that you're at risk, or maybe you've got a diagnosis, right? And so there's always ways that we can like tweak and like further focus our food choices to address specific health concerns. And my best resource for that is my book, because I have a giant table in one of the appendices that lists every nutrient that is linked to 120 different health conditions and symptoms. So if you're worried about Parkinson's, you can go and you can read about every single nutrient that studies have shown getting more of that nutrient reduces your risk of Parkinson's, or it slows down progression. And then you can go into the book and find the best food sources of that nutrient and then go, okay, well, now I'm going to eat more berries, right? Like that's where I'm going to get these really important nutrients. So I've also tried to create a thorough enough resource that you can adapt for an additional focus to meet your specific health concerns.
Mm. I also wanted to ask you about, so I mean, obviously I do mental health,
Yeah.
because like that's what I studied for my school. Um, but do you have any information in that appendix about
Mm-hmm.
like depression, anxiety? And then also, what about the fact that with people who have like ADHD, autism, they tend to have a lot more textural things that like if they eat mushrooms, they feel like they can't even swallow it. Like, how would
Oh,
people even approach some of that?
yeah. So first question is depression and anxiety are in this table. Actually, so are ADHD and autism spectrum. ARFID is not in here. I don't think I've specifically encountered. I mean, it's not super well understood in terms of the underlying physiology. So I haven't encountered studies that look at nutrients that might improve ARFID, but just talking about it as a challenge. Um, so um, this is okay. So uh, there's 2 pieces of this, right? So like, I am not going to take away your safe foods. That is not what we're doing here. We're looking for ways to maybe focus, right? So if you have a vegetable in your safe foods list, that's your vegetable. Great. If it's carrots, we're going to eat lots of carrots, right? Like that it's and if it's only boiled carrots, we're just going to eat boiled carrots. That's great. We might look at, I would definitely recommend working with a specialist who can try to expand that list of safe foods. So my daughter, my oldest daughter, had sensory processing disorder with very strong food aversions as a child. It's not quite the same, like I understand, but there are some strategies that can work in both situations. And so for us, it was finding those foods that were very similar in terms of flavor and texture, and actually she was very temperature sensitive with her foods as well. So they pretty much all had to be room temperature. And we were able to sort of like expand out from like steamed green beans were like her only vegetable for a long time. We were actually able to get 2 steamed broccoli from
Ooh.
steamed green beans by focusing first on the stems, right? Like the stem was the more similar texturally. And then we got a little bit of the floret part. And that like slowly expanded. So like working on expanding that list of safe foods so that there is a wider collection of especially more nutrient dense safe foods, and then see where the simple swaps are. So if bread is a safe food, can that bread be multigrain? I understand it's texturally not the same. So maybe the answer is no. But is there a way of swapping out white bread for like whole wheat or a multigrain bread that will still sort of satisfy what the requirements are for a food to feel comfortable to eat, but that just gives a little bit more nutrition.
Mm.
So is there a simple swap that works? If not, okay, we'll work with it, right? Is there, can we slowly expand this list? And like within this, can we change the proportions of what we're eating within our list of safe foods to make sure we're getting our nutrients met? So if we have limited vegetables, okay, but we're just gonna eat more of those, even though there's only a couple different ones that we're going to eat. And hopefully over time we can expand how many different ones we're eating. But yeah, dietary diversity definitely is not a great goal for somebody who has such strong food aversions. That's okay. There's still tweaks we can make. And then the other thing here is this is definitely a situation where you want to be working with a registered dietitian, a licensed nutritionist, somebody who can look at the foods you're eating and go, okay, there's no food source of insert list of nutrients here. And it identifies the need for a targeted supplementation strategy. So as much as we don't see benefit in the general population to multivitamins, this is a case where, even though it hasn't been studied in that same way, we would do supplementation to cover our nutritional bases. Is it as good as getting the nutrients from food? No. Is it better than not getting those nutrients? Yes. So, yeah, I think there's, in this situation, we just take a more gentle approach. If we're talking about ADHD, this still might be a list of safe foods, right? That conversation might still be the same conversation. But I think there's a sort of separate challenge with ADHD, which is task initiation related to feeding ourselves, right? So it is the it's mealtime and I need to switch from what I'm doing to go prepare food, and I can't, right? It just requires too much energy to switch tasks and go prepare food. So in this case, this is where I really like having a collection of foods in the home that really don't require much energy. So this is where frozen dinners or canned soups might be really helpful.
Mm.
Or maybe if you do have a day of the week where, a weekend, right? You don't work, so you do typically have more energy for cooking. Maybe you batch cook, but you also then like portion out the meals so that they're right there and they just need to be heated, and there's no dishes, right? Like that's the other thing, is sometimes it's not the feeding, it's the cleaning up, right? Sometimes it's the dishes afterwards. So okay, maybe it's paper plates. Like we can make these compromises, right? To figure out ways to still improve our diet quality in a way that works for us and that recognizes everybody has some kind of challenge, right? Like, and for somebody it might be just time, right? You're working 2 jobs, you get home and you're exhausted and you don't want to spend 30 minutes cooking. That's ridiculous. You want to spend those 30 minutes with your kid before they go to bed. You haven't seen them for 16 hours, right? For someone else, it might be no access to a grocery store and we're trying to find healthy foods at the gas station. For someone else, it might be budget. For someone else, it might be exhaustion from chronic fatigue syndrome. For someone else, it might be like task initiation from ADHD. For someone else, it might be food aversions, and lots of people will be a mix, right? Like we all have so much going on. now. And so Nutrivore is as much about, so I think it's very important to figure out ways to make a healthy diet fit our lives rather than completely rejigging our lives to fit a healthy diet. So with
Ooh, that's
Nutrivore,
good.
we respect all of our individual challenges and we accept imperfection. We don't want to don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, right? We accept good. Good is good is great. We did good, right? Like that is worth celebrating. It's worth celebrating if you have ARFID and you are able to add one more safe food and it's a vegetable. Oh my gosh, that is amazing. We want to celebrate that. So I think it's as much about understanding ourselves and setting ourselves up for success, right? Like in that interest of sustainability, so that we can have higher diet quality for the rest of our lives. That means finding ways um, to make foods, to choose healthier foods, to have those healthier meals. We need to find a way to make that work for us as individuals. And that means catering to all of the challenges that each of us have, so that we are making sure that each step we make in that iterative process towards long-term healthy eating patterns as lifelong healthy habits, that each step we're building on the success of the one prior. So that might mean tiny, tiny little small changes, right? And that's okay. There's no race. There's no like time you have to figure this out by X time, right? It's studies show if you adopt a healthy diet at age 60, you can still add an average of 8 years to your life. If you adopt a healthy diet at age 80, you can still add almost 3.5 years to your life, right? So like it's going to be beneficial no matter when we get there, and it's okay to get there slowly over time.
Wow, I love that. That just reminds me about your philosophy and how it is really accessible to everyone. And that I think is the biggest thing that I took away from reading. It is a permissive nutrition profile. And for people with a lot of mental health conditions, you're going to watch a lot of those like reels on Instagram or TikTok, and they're going to tell you, don't eat this, don't eat that. That's
Right.
toxic. It's going to hurt you. You are poisoning yourself. And then you read the real science and you're like, okay, we can take a step back. Um, Not eating your canned soup, if that's the only thing you're going to be eating today, is far worse than eating
Right.
it.
Yes.
Plus, it's nutrient dense. If, say, like you got a minestrone soup, like that has a lot of vegetables.
So many canned soup options that are nutrient dense. Um, they're not all, right? But I mean, okay. Two competing thoughts trying to like exit my brain at the same time. So first of all is food gives us three things. Not every food gives us all three, but there's three things we get from food. So one is energy, right? Calories. Every chemical reaction that we have going on in the body has energy as an input, right? So we are using energy to stay alive. So energy, white sugar, sure, it's just energy, but we still do need energy. So even if something doesn't have a lot of other nutrients, we don't want to like not value the energy that we're getting from food. The next is nutrients, right? Vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fatty acids, phytonutrients, vitamin-like compounds, like all of these different raw materials, right? Building blocks that make us, the things that get used up in these chemical reactions, right? Those are the things that we're focusing on with Nutrivore to try to get more of, but not to the expense of energy, or the third thing, which is experience, right? Hopefully positive. Hopefully we're getting like joy from our food, but there's also an experiential aspect to eating. There's a human nature aspect of celebrating with food, of nurturing others with food, of commiserating with food, of providing solace to others and ourselves with food, of bonding over food, right? Like we feed others and we feed ourselves as a way of showing our appreciation, our love for others and for ourselves. And that has to be incorporated into any healthy diet. Like can you craft a perfect diet? Probably not, right? But let's say you can. Let's say there's like a way of eating that is like absolutely perfect. I'm using air quotes from a long-term health perspective. It's the maximum reduction and all of the things that could go possibly wrong with you. If that diet is not supplying joy, if that diet is not a good experience to eat, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how perfect it is. It's not sustainable. You can't stick with it. And it doesn't matter what foods I eat today in terms of my long-term health. It matters how I eat on average over the next years and decades. So that's why it's so important to figure out how to incorporate more of these foods in a way that is enjoyable. And so if that canned soup is not, it's not a minestrone, it's not a chicken vegetable, right? Maybe it's something that's doesn't have a lot of vitamins and minerals, right? It's something that's, it's just calories and flavor. That gave me two out of the three things I can get from food. That's great, right? Like, it's still okay. Can we now figure out where to get our vitamins and minerals? Sure, but it doesn't take away from how that food contributed to my diet. And that's the other liberating thing about the Nutrivore philosophy is that if the goal is getting all the nutrients our bodies need from the foods we eat, that means we're looking at the whole diet. That means we're looking at the sum of all of the nutrients from all of those foods. Not every food has to contribute equally to that mission. It's okay if one of those foods was like kale and it had so much nutrition in it, and one of those foods was a donut and it just had some calories and some joy. Like that's okay. It's actually surprisingly easy to meet our nutritional needs from affordable, accessible foods. And because that's the case, it means that there's lots of room for that donut or whatever the food is that is the thing that will give you joy. So that's like one piece of my thought of that's the permissive piece. The like anti-fear-mongering piece, the myth-busting piece. I mean, I think right now there's more incorrect information about what a healthy diet looks like on the internet than there is correct information.
There's so much.
By an
Yeah.
order or two of magnitude, right? Like it is so much more. And it is fear-based predatory marketing. You're never seeing be terrified of the BPA in canned soup because blah, 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 blah. The half-life of BPA, by the way, is 3 to 6 hours. Our bodies are so good at getting rid of it. Just throwing that out there. But it's always like, be terrified of this, buy my program, health coaching, supplement line, right? Like it always goes with that sales pitch. And I just I find it abhorrent. I find, we're at a position now where every food is demonized by one fad diet or another. If you listened to every single wellness influencer out there, there would be nothing left to eat, not even water. And it just, it's not possible for all of those things to be true, right? But the vast majority of them don't align with the science. And so I wish I could just talk about why iceberg lettuce is nutritionally valuable and not have to talk about why canned foods are safe or why frozen foods are safe and nutrient dense or why ultra processed foods, they're not all the same. There's some that are nutrient dense and don't need to be limited. And there's some that aren't and probably, definitely should be eaten in moderation, right? In an ideal world.
That is one thing that also irks me a lot because it just makes all these foods so much less accessible for people who are already struggling with eating, which is, all my clients because they all have mental health conditions.
Right.
And so, like, one thing that I've been seeing a lot that some people are telling me, like, they are starting to get afraid of vegetables. I mean, they already kind of were because vegetables don't taste amazing to some people. And then you add on to there where a lot of people, and like some people who have doctorates, they tell them that these vegetables are toxic. Where does that come
Yeah.
from?
So, this is where I mea culpa, and I admit that I used to think this way, and it's kind of it's the fact that I bought into the logical fallacies that are all over the wellness community is a major reason why I communicate the way I do now. There's nothing more uncomfortable than realizing that you were wrong about something and that you told that wrong thing to a million people online.
Mhm.
Like we don't like admitting that we're wrong to our spouse, right? Having to say, oh man, um, I bought into a very pseudoscience way of thinking. It feels very logical. So this way of thinking goes back a couple of decades now, and it's just been amplified. And it's doctors and scientists teaching other doctors and scientists, right? So that is how I learned it when I first entered the wellness community. So I learned it from doctors and scientists too. So I don't think it's nefarious is kind of what I'm getting at. You know,
Mm.
I was wrong about a lot of things, but I always meant well, and I was trying to help people. I just was misinformed, and I'd fallen for this way of thinking. So the way this thinking goes is that if this compound is harmful in large amounts and it's found in this food, we shouldn't eat this food. Um, the actual science is just because a compound that is potentially harmful in large amounts is found in a food, it doesn't mean that the amount that's there or the amount that you would consume if you even ate a lot of that food is harmful. And so the fundamental like logical fallacy here is like not understanding dose. And this is the case for um well, it's dose and it's also the complexity of the human body. This is the case for anti-nutrients, which is typically what we're talking about with vegetables. We're talking about lectins, or we're talking about oxalates. But it's kind of true, like let's like make this a broader conversation so we can bring in the vegetable oils and the BPA in canned foods and pesticide residues on conventional foods, right? Let's kind of bring this all into one big conversation because it all comes down to understanding how much is a problem. So our bodies have detoxification pathways. We've got our liver, we've got our kidneys. Every cell has ways of kind of like taking some things and turning it into something inert. So what we don't want is we don't want to overwhelm our detoxification pathways, right? We want to keep our level of exposure to things that are potentially harmful in large amounts within the amount that our body can just deal with, right? So because we have all these, different ways of getting rid of even heavy metals, right? Even mercury. Our bodies can detoxify some mercury. We don't want to get more than that because that gets bad real fast. But we are able to deal with a certain amount of toxic load. So what we want to understand is how much of these things that are potentially toxic are in our food and how much can our body handle. So in toxicology, this is identified with something called a dose response. All right, what happens at 1 part per billion? Oh, nothing. Great. What happens at 1 part per million? Well, now we start to see something maybe not clear. What happens at 1 part per 1,000? Oh yeah, bad stuff. Okay, great. So what regulatory agencies do is they look at these dose responses and they set a couple of like technical numbers, right? Like the technical limits. So one is called the no observed adverse effect level. So that is the amount of anything that we can be exposed to every single day for weeks or months without it causing any health harm. From there, they set limits that are allowed to be in our food. So depending on whether we're talking about an additive or a contaminant, that limit is either called an acceptable daily intake level or a chronic reference dose. And those are set by applying what's called a safety factor to the no observed adverse effect level. So, hey, we know that at this level, nothing bad's going to happen, but let's play it extra safe and let's set our limit that's allowed in food at 100 or 1,000 times lower than that. And that whether it's 100 or 1,000, or sometimes it's only 10 times lower, what the safety factor is dependent on how much data do we have, like how certain are we about this no observed adverse effect level, and also how quickly do things get bad above that, right? Things get bad above that real fast, we're going to set an even more aggressive safety factor. And so when you look at food dyes, right? MSG, additives, preservatives, BPA, if you look at pesticide residues, the heavy metals in, chocolate, right? All of these things, when you do the math and you figure out how much of these foods you would have to eat in order to hit the acceptable daily intake level of these potentially problematic compounds that are in them, which already has a safety factor applied, the amounts are ridiculous, right? The amounts are way above, right? It's like, 4,000 servings of kale, right? It is just like a huge amount of food. There's like little exceptions here and there. There are people who exceed the acceptable daily intake level of food dyes. These are typically people living with food insecurity. So there's big socioeconomic drivers there, but there's still that safety factor. They're still not getting close to the no observed adverse effect level. And this is why we want to continue to fund the science that, revisits all of these different limits and makes sure that they stay up to date, and that we're looking at this as rigorously as possible. That's why we want to fund the regulatory agencies that enforce these limits to keep our food supply safe. But right now, it is safe. So
Mm.
that is like contaminants, additives. So what about anti-nutrients? Anti-nutrients don't have acceptable daily intake levels because they're like meaningless. So if you're talking about phytates or oxalates or lectins, you are talking about, so let's just talk about phytates and oxalates first, because they have a more similar biology. So the reason why they're anti-nutrients is that they bind to minerals and stop those minerals from being absorbed. Both of them can be metabolized by our gut bacteria. So if you have a healthy gut microbiome, you're cool. Phytates have nutritive properties and seem to actually potentially reduce risk of some health problems. So they're good. Oxalates, our bodies make oxalates. Precursors for oxalates include the amino acid glycine and vitamin C. And we can also absorb oxalates from high oxalate foods like spinach and rhubarb and tea. But our bodies can also get rid of oxalates. And for most people, you don't need to worry about it. Your body just regulates it, right? For most people, your body regulates how much it absorbs, how much it makes. You get rid of any extra. It's cool. There is a genetic disorder that affects oxalate metabolism. That's about 1 in 3 million people. So if that's you, talk to your doctor. That there's you've got something different going on. And then there are people with absorption issues, so like inflammatory bowel disease, that can absorb too much oxalates, like that regulatory mechanism breaks down. So if that's you, talk to your doctor, something different for you. For the rest of us, the amount of oxalates in our food does not correlate very well with how much extra oxalates are being excreted in our urine. The biggest risk is chronic underhydration. So if you're not drinking enough water, then your kidneys have a harder time getting rid of oxalates. The oxalates get more concentrated in the urine, and that can allow calcium oxalate crystals to form, and that increases the risk of kidney stones. So the big thing here is not the oxalates, it's the hydration, right? Like that's the thing that you want to be working on. And a lot of high oxalate foods actually decrease the risk of kidney stones. Again, reinforcing the idea that just because that thing is in the food does not mean that when it's absorbed into our body, it's a problem. And it's because here we talk about, this is the bigger picture now of anti-nutrients. That's not the only thing in the food, right? You're eating a food that is as biologically complex as we are, or just about, right? So you are compensated for that one thing that might not be great. Like if you concentrate it and give it to animals in an experiment and in really high doses, yeah, you can see bad things happen. But when we're eating it from a food, it's not the only thing we're eating. We're eating all of the other nutritive compounds in that food at the same time. And often what that means is, and in all of these cases, this is what this means, is that the compensation from the nutritive compounds more than outweighs any potential problem from that anti-nutrient, right? So yeah, is the phytate binding with some magnesium and making it not quite as absorbable? Sure, but look at all the magnesium I'm getting from this leafy green. Even if I only absorb 80% of it, I'm absorbing a ton, right? I'm getting lots of magnesium. So that nuance is typically never brought into the conversation when we're talking about the sort of fear mongering online. But the scientifically robust answer is there's always exceptions, right? There's definitely medical reasons why somebody might need to be on a low oxalate diet. That is a conversation to have with your doctor if that's you. The rest of us don't need to worry about it at all. Just make sure you're hydrating.
And I really like all of that because, like you said, so we're just going to take kale, for example. Of course, yes, it has oxalates. You know what it also has? Like you said, it has magnesium, also has
Mm-hmm.
calcium. And when we pair calcium with oxalate-based foods,
We absorb less
basically,
oxalate.
yup,
Yeah.
exactly. And a lot of those oxalate foods are also ones that we tend to cook anyway. So say rhubarb, right? That
Yeah.
decreases the oxalate count too.
I was like, I'm trying to think of, you definitely can eat raw rhubarb, not the leaves. The leaves are toxic. Don't eat those are for real toxic. Don't eat the leaves, just the stems. But that's not a normal way to eat rhubarb. Normally we make it into something delicious, like pie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Rhubarb pie.
Good stuff. Rhubarb
Waiting
apple
for the spring
crisp.
now.
Oh, that's good stuff.
My mom makes a rhubarb meringue pie. Yeah, that is, it's like one of my like favorite recipes of hers.
That sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow. And let's see, it probably has calcium in it. So meringue.
Um, well, meringue would be, you are getting a little bit of calcium from eggs, but meringue's mainly egg white and sugar.
Oh, I was thinking it had
Um,
milk for some reason.
yeah.
But okay, so maybe it doesn't.
But
But it has a
that's
lot of
okay
joy.
because I'm gonna eat it for dessert after a meal that had some
Hmm.
calcium, and all that stuff's gonna mix in my digestive tract anyways.
Hmm. But yeah, and I guess I also wanted to reflect that wow, nutrition education has changed a lot then too. Because I mean, like when I went through all of my education, I learned, yes, like obviously oxalates are anti-nutrients. However, they are paired typically with things that make it so that you're literally fine, unless, like you said, you have a condition where you maybe need to not have as
Well,
many.
the understanding the role of the gut microbiome in nutritional sciences, I mean, this is emerging science, right? This is all like the most new fascinating stuff. But when you include it's one of the things that I find it's very common in misinformation to focus on like one molecular pathway, right? So like this thing turns into this thing and this thing's bad. Well, that thing doesn't just turn into that thing, it can turn into any one of these five things, right? Like, and whether or not it does can depend on genetics and what other nutrients are present and your stress, like it's
Yeah, the
complex,
stress,
right?
exactly.
So we never want to just say, A goes to B goes to C, therefore be terrified of this food. So like we are biologically complex. Like just us just looking at the molecular pathways in our cells, like those are complex as it is. But then if you throw in our, gut bacteria that have 150 times more genes than we have, right? Like that means, for example, we can make, I think it's 23 different enzymes that can break down carbohydrates, and they can make like 1,500, right? That's why they can digest fiber and we can't. Like just thinking about their biological pathways and how many more there is now in that system, but they're part of our digestive processes, right? They make nutrients for us to absorb. A huge amount of our B vitamins actually come from our gut bacteria, not
Mhm.
from our diet, right? A large proportion of our vitamin K come from them and not from our diet. But they're also like influencing a lot of metabolic pathways. So when you like start to include them in the calculus and you go, oh yeah, they absolutely break apart oxalates from the calcium and then metabolize the oxalic acid. Same with phytate, and then they metabolize the phytic acid. And they can metabolize, like if you have a healthy gut, they can metabolize the majority of the phytate and oxalate in our diets. So cool. Like now that I've just included them in the calculus and in what I'm considering here, now I really, really don't need to worry about it, right? And it's why there's actually it's called Oxalobacter, I think, that is a bacterial genus that breaks down oxalates, and they're actually looking at creating these probiotic supplements for people who have recurring kidney stones with these bacteria that break down
Hmm.
oxalates, right? Like there's some really neat
Yeah.
stuff that's coming out of that research. For us, we can look at that research and go, it's just yet another reason that we don't need to worry about anti-nutrients, and another way that the people fear-mongering about anti-nutrients are not looking at the whole picture.
Mhm. Right. Like, technically, yes, our body doesn't process fiber. Our gut bacteria do. That doesn't mean fiber is not necessary for us. It
No,
means it's
fiber
not
does
necessary for like
so much.
technically our digestive, but it's necessary for our gut to make us like
This
actually
is
exist.
this is one of the big communication challenges in nutritional sciences is the language of essential versus non-essential nutrients. For a scientist, what that means is essential, if you don't have it, there's a disease of malnutrition. And non essential, if you don't have it, there's no disease of malnutrition. It's not a statement of like how healthy it makes you to eat or not eat those nutrients, right? So we have this group of non essential nutrients because there's no disease of malnutrition if we don't get it from our diets. But that's different than saying we can be healthy without it. And I think it's often interpreted that way, right? Like fiber is non essential. So why bother? Well, fiber reduces risk of just about everything that can go wrong health wise, but especially like diverticular disease, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, cancers affecting the digestive tract, right? Like fiber is really important, but it also reduces risk of cardiovascular disease because fiber is really important for something that's called gastroenteric recirculation. So basically, we have a bunch of things that our body will like spit into the digestive tract and then try to like recycle. So bile is made out of cholesterol, and we try to reabsorb that cholesterol to use it again. And fiber is actually really important for binding up a percent of that cholesterol to help us only recycle some of it and not all of it. And that helps to keep our serum LDL cholesterol lower. Same with like hormones, right? So that it helps us get rid of a little excess estrogen, a little extra progesterone, testosterone. Same with a lot of the products of liver detoxification. They're designed to bind with fiber in the gastrointestinal tract to help eliminate it from the body. So if we don't have fiber, that can help drive up our cholesterol. That can help contribute to hormone dysregulation, and it can interfere with detoxification processes. So we're more likely like now reabsorb and have to process that thing again that our liver already did once, in addition to everything that our gut bacteria do for us. So I think it's a great example of non-essential does not mean non-important.
Hmm. Yeah, that's everything. And then
Yeah.
that just makes me think about, I mean, there's so many diets out there, like a lot of recycled ones, right? Like the Atkins turns into
Hmm.
keto, turns into carnivore. And they do have their place.
Sure.
They There's lots of studies, right? Like, because I mean, I do a lot of mental health nutrition focus. The keto diet specifically, if you do it for about 6 to 8 weeks, it can actually improve the ratios of your gut microbiome to a more favorable ratio for specifically your mental health. However, if you do it beyond 8 weeks, like if you do not reintroduce fiber, it can make your gut microbiome worse. And then in response, potentially exacerbate your symptoms in the long run. So this is, again, that conversation. We need fiber so much.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that's happened just in like diet culture broadly, a couple of things. So first is diets that have been developed for therapeutic purposes, which keto was originally developed to treat refractory epilepsy, and can be effective, right? So approximately half of people with epileptic seizures that are not responding to anticonvulsant drugs do respond to a ketogenic diet, right? That's kind of impressive, right? But those studies were designed to also like do a lot of monitoring that is not the case if you're like, oh, I've heard about keto for weight loss, I'm going to go do this thing. So I think we've got a lot of cases where diets are generalized before the science supports their general applications, right? So keto specifically, Professor Kevin Hall, who I like super stan, did a study a few years ago where he compared a ketogenic diet to a calorie matched balanced macronutrient diet in a metabolic ward. So every calorie is being accounted for both in and out. And they looked at the shifts in body composition. And while there was a tiny bit of a bigger increase in total weight loss in the keto group, it was lean mass. There was actually higher fat loss in the balanced macronutrient group. So even keto for weight loss is not as good as a straight up energy deficit with balanced macronutrients.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, this
Wow.
is like busting the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. It's type
Dang.
study, right? Like
You're gonna need to send this
this
one
is
to
not the
me. I'm
case.
so interested in
Oh
reading
yeah,
it.
I could definitely I could track that down pretty easily for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think we have a lot of um studies that allow people to find the ones that confirm their narrative. And it takes that sort of broader view of the science. It takes looking at systematic reviews and meta-analyses, which have the highest like rigor of scientific evidence in them to really understand the nuance here, right? Like, yes, you can lose weight, but there's other ways to do it, and it doesn't appear to be very sustainable, right? It's a very challenging diet with a lot of side effects that make it pretty miserable for people. And if you're not sustaining, right, if you're not adopting healthy eating patterns, then that's driving the yo-yo dieting, right? But I also think that so much of the popularity of these diets just comes from how we've talked about diets for the last 50, 60 years, right? Starting with low fat in the 70s and then low carb in the 90s. Um, Diets have, for as long as I can remember, been talked about based on what you don't eat, right? It's low this or no this, or you cut out this, right? You cut out white foods, right? You cut out grains and legumes. You cut out animal foods, or you cut out plant foods, right? Or you cut out all carbohydrates, right? It's always defined by the thing that you're restricting. And there's two problems for that. Defining a diet based on restriction is setting you up to fail. Restrictive dieting increases food obsession, food fixation, food cravings, emotional eating. It makes you more susceptible to developing an eating disorder. And eventually, you will hit a moment where you can't do it anymore. And you break your rule. It's technically called disinhibition. And that unravels all your health behaviors. When you approach a diet based on a list of yes foods and no foods, you have that very like black and white thinking going into it, and you are restricting your, foods that you enjoy, whether they're your favorite foods or not, they will still call your name when you are not eating them. When you approach a diet with that restrictive mindset, you are setting yourself up to be white knuckling it until you can't do it anymore, and then you will fail. And you think it's your fault, right? That's what diet culture teaches us. Diet culture teaches us that when you fall off your diet wagon, that it's because you didn't have enough willpower or discipline, that you were weak, right? That you like, that there's something wrong with you. No, the diet required you to fail to sell you the next diet. That is the foundation of the entire diet and weight loss industry. You were set up to fail by every single diet. And I think that part of that is when you think of a diet, right? Most of the time people are going on these diets to lose weight. Losing weight's easy, keeping it off is hard, right? So every single one of these diets works for weight loss differently. Like some are better than others, but you can lose weight just with just about any dietary structure. Whether or not you can maintain that dietary structure, whether or not that causes larger or smaller physiological adaptations, right? So we get hungrier over time. Our hunger hormone ghrelin goes up. It gets suppressed less with meals, which means we're hungrier between meals and we're less satisfied after a meal. The higher our caloric deficit, our basal metabolic rate can drop, but so can our non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is the calories we burn doing things like fidgeting. So we conserve energy. So over time, our bodies just starts fighting it, right? Our body is making it harder and harder to stick to it. And then you throw in restrictive mindset on top of that. So I'm hungrier and I'm missing this food and craving it, and I'm more susceptible to emotional eating, right? All of that is leading to that like yo-yo. But then because we're sold that it's our fault, right? And because we credited the foods we cut out for our success, initial success, right? So I followed this diet and I lost 10 pounds, and it's because I cut out all these things. We both are like, well, it was my fault that I couldn't do that diet, so I'm going to try the next one, right? Maybe I can do this next one. I'm sure I can do this next one, right? Even though all of the same problems are still there, we're still set up to fail. But also, if I thought that first diet worked because of what I cut out, I'm going to look at what's the next thing I can cut out. What's the next tier, right? What is the more restrictive version of this that I can do? And so I think that has led to the growing popularity of more and more and more restrictive diets that are restricting more and more, like all of the food sources of nutrients, right? They're actually digging even deeper holes in terms of nutrient shortfalls. So that means they have long-term health detriment at the expense of potentially short-term weight loss. But most people, you don't get the fine print of, oh, and by the way, this will increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and osteoporosis in the future. But I think it's sort of, it's the human nature that's being leveraged to drive the diet and weight loss industry. Is the fact that we are crediting the restrictions. So we're looking for more restrictions, that we think it's our fault that we failed that diet, not that the diet failed us. And it's never being explained to us this way, because then the entire industry would crumble and it's worth, a couple $100 billion a year. So yeah, it's if I can do anything with Nutrivore, it is to put an end to dieting, putting an end to that cycle, right? Let's disrupt this whole industry because it's not making us healthier.
Yeah. The only thing that's actually going to work is crowding them out, not taking them out.
Oh, I like that.
That's like again, we're just like on the same wavelength here. Like the more you can add, the less you're going to even want.
Yeah.
But when you take out, the more you're going to want.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that when you focus on addition, but full permission to eat the foods that you want, right? So, for me, so I need a treat every day, right? Like that's what I need to maintain my healthier diet. I need a treat every single day. It's usually dessert after dinner, but not always. Um, but the thing about it sort of being, right, dessert is I've eaten this meal that I also made in a way that was really yummy to me, right? I also really enjoyed my meal. I ate lots of vegetables. I ate a good quality protein. I've got some slow burning carbohydrates in there. And then my portion of that treat is less than if I had restricted it, right? And it's less in part because it's after a meal and I've eaten something else, but it's also less because I had some of this yesterday, right? And the day before. And I still like I'm not it's I didn't have to like let myself have it because I'm always allowed to have it because
Mm,
it is the food that's giving me joy. Um, as I like to say, nourishing my soul, if not my cells. And that for me, it's an important tool, right? That full permission to eat that treat every single day is what keeps my overall diet quality high and keeps me on track. And I think that is very counter to what we are sold by every single diet out there.
mm, yeah. I mean, I just think about sugar cravings, exactly what you said. That is basically the best way to reduce your sugar cravings,
Yeah.
just by
Don't
allowing yourself.
Yeah, don't detox, right, from sugar. Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, I also satisfy sugar craving with a piece of fruit. There's some times during the day where a fruit is enough, right? And then there's
Mm,
sometimes during the day where it's not, and I want a piece of chocolate, right, or a cookie, right? Um, Understanding that cravings are something like a sugar craving can be increased by stress and lack of sleep. And can be increased by not fueling ourselves enough earlier in the day, right? So by having too light of a breakfast or skipping breakfast and too light of a lunch, that's going to magnify sugar cravings later in the day. So understanding that there's these physiological drivers that can intensify the craving, but the food I'm craving, the thing that I want, that cookie or that piece of chocolate, that is associative learning. That is not driven by my physiology as much as it is my psychology. As much as it is like this is a food that, we had as a kid when we had something positive, right? Or I was really sad that time and I ate those cookies and that made me feel better, right? Like it doesn't have to be a positive association. But the actual food we're craving comes from associative learning from our past. So it's a very like habitual food usually. Like most people crave the same few different foods when they want a treat, right? But the magnitude, right? And then also the control, right? So when the magnitude's higher, typically we feel like we need to eat more in order to satisfy that craving. That piece of it is very much driven by, did you eat enough earlier in the day? Did you get enough sleep? Have you had a little activity today? How's your stress levels? And sometimes we can control those things and sometimes we can't. And I think it's still okay if my craving's really big because life was lifing. Okay, then my craving was really big that day and I needed more to satisfy that craving. And that's okay. Life was lifing. I will see what kind of little tweaks I can make tomorrow, maybe, right? Like maybe there's something I can say no to, I can get off my plate. Maybe I can just go to bed a half hour earlier tonight, right? Like maybe there's something I can do to help address the magnitude of that craving tomorrow. I can eat breakfast tomorrow, right? That'll help. I'll eat a good breakfast, right? There's often little things that we can do even when we don't have complete control over the stressors in our lives. Um, but but even then, I think it's okay to honor, yeah, I've got a lot going on right now and my cravings are big. I'm going to do the small things I can do to try to regulate it, but sometimes
mm.
sometimes life is life like that and that's okay, right? That doesn't mean I'm not disciplined or I don't have willpower. It means I got a lot going on and that's increasing my food cravings. That's it. That's all that means.
And that is always okay.
Yeah.
We can honor what our body's asking us, or we can like ask it more critically, like, are you wanting a sugar craving or because I didn't eat enough? And
Right.
like just asking yourself those specific questions to improve your relationship to your body,
Yeah.
cultivating that bodily intuition that we have been stripped from because of diet culture, telling us what
Yes.
to do and what not to do.
And
And
I
that is,
think
yeah.
the more we cultivate that um connection, the less power food has. And I
Mm,
think that is the thing that has gone along. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody talk about like food calling their name? Because I have certainly felt that many, many, many times, right? Like, I'm a person who has quite a lot of, I guess, what would be called food noise, right? Where like I know all of the different things in my pantry, right? And sometimes one of those items will be like, Sarah, I'm over here. You could come eat me now. That'd be great. But I think that cultivating that connection with ourselves while giving ourselves permission to be human and permission to satisfy those cravings. I think that's how we get out of the place where we feel like food has power over us and back to a place where we feel like we are in control of our food choice.
That was good. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your time and all of your knowledge. Um, if you could just speak a little bit to where people can find you online and how to support you, I would just love for you to talk about that quick.
I would love that. So my home base is my website, Nutrivore.com. If you like nerding out with like really, really detailed articles, that is the best place to do it. There's lots of practical stuff there too, but if you want to learn about every single thing that coenzyme Q10 does in your body, that's where you can do that. And then if you can learn about every good food source of it, that's where you can do that. And then from there, if you click on the join button in the top right menu, you will find links to my social media, but also I am at Dr. Sarah Ballantyne on TikTok, YouTube, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. And I
Ooh, you're
have
on
different
everything.
content. Almost. I'm not active on X, but everywhere else pretty much. And so all of those places also get different types of content. So if you like hanging out in more than one place, I'm worth a follow everywhere you like to hang out online. But also in that join button, you can find my free weekly newsletter, which has more bite-sized information. If like reading a 12,000 word article does not seem like a fun afternoon to you, and my feelings do not hurt if that's the case. So more bite-sized information in my free weekly newsletter. You can also link to my Patreon that get exclusive podcasts and fun fact sheets and ebooks every single month. And that's where you can also find out about my book, Nutrivore, The Radical New Science for Getting the Nutrients You Need from the Food You Eat, which is available wherever books are sold and might be at your local library. If it's not at your library, you can put in a request because librarians love to take people's requests to figure out what books they want to stock. So yeah, if it's not there, ask for it.
Perfect. Yes to all of that. Your book was amazing, and I highly recommend everyone read it because, again, like I said, that was exactly my philosophy, just in words, like written down, and it was so scientifically sound and practical. I think that's what I enjoyed the most out of it.
Yeah,
Very
thank you.
practical steps. So, yeah, thank you so much again, and we'll just keep in touch.
Yes, please. Thank you. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you again for having me.